So today we're here interviewing Andrew Hattan, who has a small little upland farm in the Yorkshire Dales, and we're just going to try and explore how you came to be here. And so how big's your farm?
It's last count it was 460 acres, about 180 hectares I think, roughly, of which 50 acres is meadow.
Yep.
And there'll be some similar equivalent area of pasture, and then the rest is largely rough grazing or heather moorland.
Now, when you came to visit us, it would have been about 5 years ago,
Yes.
6 years ago now.
Some time ago.
Yeah, and I think how long have you had the farm then?
We've been here 10 years, so we'll have been 5 or 6 years here when we came to visit you.
Yeah.
Which was probably at the point where we were having thoughts about where we were going in terms of direction.
Yeah. And so, I mean, why did you end up here? I mean,
I've always wanted to farm. I originally came. My parents are from Leeds.
Yeah.
I was born in Nigeria whilst they were on the VSO. We came back, and my dad pre-trained as a teacher.
Yeah.
And moved up to North Yorkshire, and really from the age of 5 I've lived in a rural environment or rural community, and for some bizarre reason wanted to farm, and so set my stall out from an early age, and did a degree, then worked on various farms, large scale and small, covering all sorts of enterprises, from soft fruit to intensive dairy, and all the time desperately wanting to come back to farm for myself, and in the end, through making various contacts, we were able to secure this tenancy with my current landlord.
So what I find really interesting is this farm was, at the time when you took it over, it was not. Was it being farmed, this land? Or?
Yeah. So this was the previous tenants here. The Beecrofts were getting on. Neither of them in the best of health, and none of the next generation were either willing or able to take the farm on, and so the Beecrofts decided that fortunately they'd got a house to move into. Yep. And they decided to retire in 2006.
Yep.
And so we were able to take the farm over in 2007, and they'd been farming it on a very low-key basis for quite some time, reflecting their physical health and abilities, really. And at the age of 65 or 75, you're not up to what you are when you're in your 30s.
Oh, so because a lot of farms, because we're right up here, I always think that people always, you get rural farms, yes, you get rural locations, but then you get proper into the dales, like here, and when you get into like Swaledale and Sunnyside, and the farms are just a different style, Yes. And I think that I don't think people are used to driving on the roads where they see the cows and they see the farms.
Yes, yes.
And to get here is a pain.
It is a pain.
So
we're 890 feet up, and at the end of 3 miles of potholey stone track.
Yeah. So why did you choose? Why not like a nice? Farming's never easy, but easier location.
Well, yeah, it's interesting.
You got 2 kids. You got to take them to school every day. It's like.
Well, it's interesting because I've having done such a wide range of farming activity in the past, my view in terms of what hard farming is would be intensive dairy farming, which you are never. The cows are on a metabolic knife edge and are working extremely hard, and the attention to detail that's required to manage them means that you are never far enough away from them to get a break. And in my if you're milking 3 times a day and these cows are getting 10,000 kilos, it's a really hard life for the farmer. So I don't count myself as being particularly hard off. We've got a wonderful view, we've got a fantastic landlord, we've got great neighbours, we live in a lovely community, But for me, getting started as a first generation tenant with very little capital behind me, it was the fact that I could, the rents were low. And it was a way into farming, and I had a landlord who wanted some new blood on the estate.
And so I mean, what is happening to other farms in this? Because we are so remote, and there is other upland farms that exist, but I feel like that this is the edge of farming in terms of what a lot of people are doing. In terms of there's a lot of this land has now gone to ranch in terms of this.
I think that it's under a great deal of pressure. I think that the farm finances are not great. Sally, my wife, works for the National Health Service, and without that we wouldn't be here. The farm is very heavily subsidised. Without that subsidy we wouldn't be here either. If you look at a lot of my neighbours, then there are second and third incomes but unfortunately the drive to go farming was so strong, despite my background in management and consultancy and science. The drive to do it for myself and succeed was overrode those heart ruled the head, really. But I think we've come through that now, and we have now got a vision, and we know where we want to be, and we can, with a bit of good luck, see a future for ourselves. But I think that the economics of upland farming really are on a knife edge now.
So why is upland farming more difficult?
So upland farming is probably difficult because of primarily that we have a short growing season and our weather is not particularly great. So for instance, in Cornwall, I know I spoke to Trevor Howe from Kennel Vale Cheese. His cows were turned out yesterday. We won't be turning our cows out now for another possibly another 7 weeks. And his cows will have been out grazing until, I would think, the beginning of December. Our cows will come in at the beginning of November. And so he's got a longer grazing season. Grass is your cheapest food. So we have to feed our cows with more expensive food for longer. We are perhaps further away from the market. The climate dictates what sort of animals we can keep as well. Means that we have to have breeds that are resilient.
So and down that way you have a breed of cow, which is the Northern Dairy Shorthorn. And again, I mean, until I met you, I'd never heard of the Northern Dairy Shorthorn. I'd heard of the Dairy Shorthorn. It's like traditional British cow. A lot of cheesemakers pepper it in there. There are a few of them in there because it kind of helps, don't they? But you decided to go specifically down this route for this very specific cow. And why? So
I mean, that's interesting. Dairy Shorthorn dates. Its evolutions are in the Dales, the Pennine Hills, really, North Yorkshire, or the North Riding as it was, Westmoreland, Cumberland, County Durham, and probably the southern part, the border with Northumberland, and they were a relatively unimproved strain of Shorthorn cattle, which can be traced, I think, back to Thomas Bates and the gang who farmed around the Tees Valley, who set up the breed in the early 1800s. And I think that what happened really was that those genes were taken into the Dales as cattle and as cows and bulls, and because of the relative isolation, the close community, the difficulty of actually importing new genes, really the poor communication within these hills. I mean that in its broadest sense. I mean transport,
exactly,
and things went very slowly. Things changed very slowly, and these cattle evolved to be evolved to within the system that was operating in the hills. The stone barns, the short growing season. They had a woolly coat. They were thrifty. They're very agile. But also served a dual purpose as well, and so they evolved really to suit the farming system, or the two evolved together really, and I think that nothing formally was done with the Northern Dairy didn't really exist as a separate breed until 1944, and I think that what happened was that certain of the breeders realised during probably just pre-war, with the influx of black and white cattle, sort of from 1913 onwards, that they could see what was coming, and they decided that really they valued their cattle and were very proud men, and I think that they decided that they needed to set up their own breed society to protect what they'd got. And unfortunately, our history has proven them to be probably too late in doing that. In the Holstein or Friesian, as it was then, was probably more advanced as a milking animal when it arrived, and very quickly, over the space of 25 years, the Northern Dairy animal, well, the number of herds declined drastically. But what happened in 1944 was that there was meeting at Penrith or Kirby Searing, I think, that they decided to form the society, and then there was a huge political argument with the established Coates Herd Book Shorthorn Society, and there was a big fallout, and so they both went their separate ways, because Northern Dairies wanted to felt that they had a separate animal, a different breed of cattle. So there was a big fallout, and that has continued, I think, or until probably relatively recently. So we thought when we were we thought that when, and I had so for me personally, my mother was from Leeds, but spent her holidays in Farndale in North York Moors, and remembers Northern Dairy Shorthorn cattle. And now, as a kid, she would talk about she would talk to me about them, and I thought that these were just these mythical beasts that never had actually existed. Was it just a lot of nonsense? And then I think probably the only reference I had to them was the Observer's Book of British Livestock, or whatever it was, and in there was a Northern Dairy Shorthorn animal, and so you sort of thought, oh well, they were there, and then you sort of hear very odd snippets about them now and again, and then I worked between my year between university and between school and university, and then during my university holidays, I worked for a farm at Askerig in Wensleydale, the Hodgson family, and they had bred Northern Dairy Shorthorns, who were a good, well-known herd, and David had actually bred a bull for the rare breeds at the very end of the sort of at the very end of the 1970s, I think, and so Lowland Sunrise is still on stud, or it's got some straws, it's still available. So that was another contact. And then when we came here, I for some reason I found out that my neighbours across at Intake, the Eubanks, their dad, their granddad, Spencer Eubank, was the secretary of the local society, the local Northern Dairy Society, and they had a well-known herd as well. So they were and then I eventually got hold of some of the herd books, and you could see there were just across the day. So if you were to look at the Swaledale flock book, Swaledale breeders, and you were to look at the Northern Dairy Shorthorn breeders, there would be, I would suspect that there's probably about 75% overlap, I would imagine. And so, and then we'd had these Galloways, and actually we got to the point where, sorry, I'm talking. We'd got these Galloways, and they were great. They looked after themselves, very self-contained, which was fabulous for us when we first came, because we were so busy trying to sort the infrastructure out. They were very forgiving. But when it came to actually, there were two or three issues really. One, when it comes to handling them inside, they don't like it. They're quite happily turn on you and flatten you.
Your land's not that. You've got a lot of land, but it's not. This is not like prime pasture. So you can't just chuck them out.
No. So they're very hardy, and we could outwinter them, no doubt. But unlike Neil Heseltine, who's on limestone, when Neil has a chance of outwintering for a lot of the year, our land is peat over clay, and it's very poorly drained. So we're waterlogged from about middle of October through to end of March normally, and we're getting towards the end of March now, and it's still waterlogged. So we could, if we had our cows out all year round, we'd just end up puddling it to death. There'd be nothing left. And so, and the final thing was that beef production is so energetically inefficient that we and so slow that if we kept 20 cows here, we'd actually, and wanted to finish livestock, which is the only way you can make any money out of traditional beef, is actually, in my view, is to take it right through to the plate. Is that we would have had 80 head of livestock on here. We can't sustain that.
You don't have the land for it. So you'd be buying stuff in.
So we'd be buying stuff in, or we'd be sending our cows away, or this, something that. And so we got to the point where we thought, crikey, it's a lot of work over the winter. We have to have these cows inside. So there's actually no point having Galloways, because they may as well. They
want to be outside.
They want to be outside. So we thought, well, actually, let's go. And David Hodgson said, if you're going to keep something you like, that means something to you. And so we got 2 or 3. We actually got 2 or 3 dairy shorthorns from a farm from Helen Raitt at Grassington, just to see whether they'd survive.
She's got Northern as well.
Yeah, she has. So Helen Raitt's got a herd, and I think they're intended to sort of go down the cheese route eventually. And so we got 2 or 3 shorthorns to see whether they'd survive the experience, and they did. So then you get.
They weren't too unhappy.
No, they were right. So as we got rid of a few Galloways, we sort of replaced them with some shorthorns. So then
from there, did you bring in shorthorns with the idea to milk and then make cheese, or because you thought, I can't make meat, so we'll milk?
Well, I think,
and then how did it?
Well, so when I finished it at my PhD, I'd done a lot of 3 times a day milking, and Sally, and I'd vowed to Sally I would never milk cows again, because it was just horrendous. Just you didn't have a life, and so really for a long time we didn't think that was part of the equation. And then I think that what happened was that it's a lot of effort over the winter to keep cows here. You're spending, and with the Galloways, you sold a calf for 300 quid. Well, that just about covered the winter feed costs and straw. Never mind your labour. And so, well, if I'm going to have cows, and I'm going to do some, well, actually, we need to be a little bit imaginative about how we approach this, because there's no point doing that work if they're not going to turn a coin. So I think we basically, I wondered, so what is this breed of cattle for really? What did they do with these? And I sort of asked myself the question, and well, I suppose they did. They were there. They were a dual purpose animal, and they made they produced milk and made that into cheese. And actually, milk is energetically more, several orders of magnitude more efficient in terms of energy than producing beef or lamb. And so you start to think, well, is it possible to make something of this? And then you sort of consider the milking side and think, oh, I can't do that. We do a lot of, as a family, we do a lot of things. We do rugby and cricket and music, and that means that to milk twice a day here is very difficult. We haven't got labour it's really difficult. There's no extra labour force. So how can we possibly come round to coming up with a plan? And then you sort of start, and then again, same time, it's a list of coincidences, but we managed to get high-speed broadband. And then then that opens your world, completely opens your world, and you're
not just this farm, which you are like. No. You can't see a house out that window. No. You can't see even a barn out that window. No. All of a sudden you are.
And this
farm.
Is a good day.
Also, you're a farm in the middle of nowhere, but once upon a time you were disconnected. And now you are.
We are much more connected. So that means I think one day I was playing around and just put in Northern Dairy short haul, and it came up with Charles Castle, who's the vet in Northamptonshire, who is the honorary Northern Dairy Golden Secretary, and so he's sort of the second generation of the Northern Dairy sort of survival package. He's taken on the reins from Brian Bellis in Cornwall and Jeff Dixon largely, and has an intimate knowledge of the cows and where they are and their breeding. And being a vet, he's been able to practically do some embryo harvesting. So there's several embryos in storage. We've bred bulls. He understands sustainable levels of inbreeding. So we got some more cattle from Charles. So it opened my eyes to that. But equally, at the same time, I was able to see that there were people milking once a day, or the possibility of milking once a day. And we'd also looked at robots as well, and that was another thing. How is that a labour-saving thing? And that was initially something that I thought, well, that makes it possible. We've probably moved on from there, but again, it starts to thought process.
The idea starts to evolve, doesn't it?
And so it really evolved from there, and then we thought, well, and then I think that we did. What did we do? We came to you and said, if we had some rare breed cattle, what would you do? What cheese would you make, or whatever it was? And I think it was Kathy at the time. She says, "I'll make a unpasteurised blue cheese or something or other." And so we sort of, and I think you sort of gave us the kick up the backside that sort of got us on our way, maybe, or gave us the confidence to think that there was at least half an opportunity.
Just show you that there's farms out there that have a handful of acres or a handful of cows and have a viable. I think that, I don't know what you think. I think for the last 30 years in farming, we've had this idea that it has to get bigger. You have to get bigger cows, more feed, more milk, more economic efficiencies. A farm like this can't do that.
No, we can't.
You can't. You also just can't. You can't put loads of animals on this land. You can't farm hay. You can't. No. You are an upland farm. You're marginal land.
Yes, we are.
It's terrible. It's terrible ground.
It is. Yes, it is.
You're a muppet.
No. I'm quite happy to comment. I'm usually doing all sorts of things.
Because of that, you can harness what is special.
That's what we have to do. We have to do. If we. So one of the big problems in the Yorkshire Dales, as I see it, is that we use a paradox, and that paradox is small-scale commodity producer. Those two, small-scale and commodity, should not go in the same sentence. And it took me 5 years to realise that, because I was still in farmer mode. I was still in. This is what I want to do.
In British farming has been. For years, they came along with that fertiliser, put it on it, popped up the grass. They came along with a better breed of cow. You got more milk. It's been that has been the farming mentality. It's been hammered into us. But to be fair, that's a legacy of post-war agriculture, where we had to feed
we had to feed the nation, and those guys are now in their 60s and well, now in their 70s and 80s,
yeah.
and actually there aren't many people alive who remember what it was like pre-war in terms of farming and wildlife, etc. So we're sort of almost into unknown territory in some respects. And when people say that it's always been like this, well, and if you're 80, well, then that doesn't take you actually that far back.
Yeah.
80 years, it's only 30 years older than I am.
Yeah.
And that's not, and I was born at the end of the 60s.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of the damage was probably done during the war.
I picked up Kit Calvert's autobiography, and it was just a fascinating book on how we kept Wensleydale alive during the war.
Yes.
But I think we know how Kit Calvert kept Wensleydale alive during the war. When you read his autobiography, it was the way that everything changed during the war was astronomical. Even the way that we sold like eggs and and then, as I said, Wensleydale had to get super fine, had to get 16% moisture, which is like cheddar's like
it's unedible.
So if you wanted the super fine grade and the top price, and then he was talking about some of the farms that most of them gave up.
Yes.
And he went up to a farm. There was a really interesting little bit where the Wensleydale inspector said there's a farm and the fat content on their cheese is massively dropped. You need to go and find out why. And so he went up, and this was this man with 3 cows making cheese in the middle of the Dales, and he was getting a low grade anyways because he was making a soft cheese. And he was like, "Why is your fat content in your cheese dropped?" And it's like, "No idea." It's like, "Are you selling butter? You're taking the cream off and selling butter?" They're like, "No, well, I'm having a cup of cream off the top of the milk every morning because I feel a bit ill." It was just brilliant. And that changed his cheese overnight because it was just with 3 cows. But they had Northern Dairy Shorthorns, and it's
No, I think that it's the interesting thing is about the economics of it up here. As I say, I said earlier, I've been involved in this project, and what's sort of becoming clear is that regardless of scale of enterprise, it would appear that the volume factor, the size by which an existing farm needs to increase to cover to break even is somewhere between 3 and 4 times. Now that isn't possible in terms of volume output, in terms of number of animals sold. We can't do that. But equally, when they look at larger farms that are already 3 or 4 times as big up in the uplands, it's the same rule applies. They need to become 3 to 4 times bigger to break even. So costs are not, variable costs appear not to be proportionate or proportional to output, and that is perhaps something that's intrinsic to perhaps the climate or the difficulties of farming.
But do you think that there is a fundamental problem in the price of food? It's part of that we are paying. We have a drive. It seems to be a race to the bottom.
Yes,
for food.
Yes,
in the 50s, 30% of our disposable income was on food, and now it's like 4 or 5.
I don't know what it is.
It's tiny.
It was 13 when I was at college,
and it was 30% 60 years ago. And when they started, and you think this race for cheap food, is it sustainable? Because
it's born again. It was born
out of the war. Because of the war,
and then perhaps modelled on what's happening in the States and industrialisation of food production, and the fact that we industrialised early, and we have lost the contact with that. We're 10 generations back from when our cousins farmed in the countryside. We are now very much an urban community, and so I think that and we have so many more things. The world is very much more interesting, and with so many more.
We've got more things to spend money on,
to do, and everybody does it. So we all look to making our money go that bit further. But yes, in terms of food production, there is we are not paying the true price of the cost of
it's
production.
But I mean,
A, because it's subsidised, and B, because of the damage that we are
because
doing.
what is not taken into account of industrial farming is the damage that's done to the environment. So it's made cheap by fossil fuels, and it's made cheap by
and the argument about
grain, imported soya.
Well, and that and the sort of research. I can't remember the paper, but there's somebody been suggesting that we have 60 harvests left in our arable soils in the east and southeast.
Just because it's like. Because we haven't learned from that Dust Bowl in America 200 years ago.
Degraded, so I haven't read it, but it sounds as if. And I'm hearing from up here. So what we do have practice a degree of transhumance. So we do send some sheep down to the Vale of York for a period of time over winter to sort of graze dairy land. That actually has always gone on. That's gone on since the monks. Since the since the 10th century, 11th century. And that still goes on. And what we're hearing from people in the Vale of York, and more than one, is that they have lost their soils are becoming very blocky, losing structure, and they have got terrible problems with blackgrass, which is I think it's meadow foxtail. I think it's grassland name. So that's a pernicious weed of wheat growing. And when I was, again, going back 25 years, when I was at university, blackgrass was a problem in Essex, Hertfordshire, Suffolk, Northamptonshire, and now it's in Yorkshire.
It's creeping up.
And basically, when you've got blackgrass, we've used several different families of chemicals to try and control it, and it's won every time. And we're now farmers in the Vale of York are starting to have to fallow, and we're starting to have to look at spring crops again, and bring more livestock.
Do you think that then we will start to see more of a return to like the traditional methods of farming, with more rotation and more, less intensive? Let's put everything on, let's clean it, let's clear it, let's put some super fast growing grass on, and
I don't know. I'm not an arable farmer. It's a long time since I did any arable farming, but it strikes me that we need to be much more soil focused and up here as well in terms of how we farm.
So how are you focused up here to be more soil focused?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm thinking about it, and I think that I'm very conscious of travelling on the ground. At any time.
But also,
we were waterlogged most of the year, so I just got rid of my bike, saying, well, actually, there's no point going on it. We've got a track right the way through the farm. I'll stick to the track. But I've got rid of the quad. But in terms of soil, I think for us, it's about.
Even like things like you've planted all these trees.
We've planted trees. So in fact, yes. So the soil we're. Yes, we're trying to stop some erosion. We're trying to reduce the amount of runoff in our small way, but there are areas that just don't lend themselves to farming naturally, and should be trees as far as I'm concerned. And so,
do you think your hay meadows make a difference?
They do in terms of, I don't know, it's early days. I think the hay meadow project is 10 years into a 30-year project. And I think.
But have you seen a difference already, or?
No, I don't think I've seen any difference in terms of how the soil behaves. But I think, as I say, we're still establishing those. And I think that, again, I've got to look at whether I have sheep on grazing those or cattle, and what that does in terms of the flora. And I think that we're battling against climate change as well. So as we said earlier on, we just don't have the hard frosts really, for prolonged hard frosts. We just get we get bucket loads of rain, I don't know, we have at least 60 inches of rain here a year, and, which is not as wet as some places, but when you've got impeded drainage,
like we have rain, but we're on limestone, so it doesn't matter. You know,
it's just it's like farming on a chocolate cake for 8 months of the year. So it's a really good question to ask, and I think that what I'm trying to do is introduce into the pastures is to introduce some more diversity, some more deep rooting herbs in there. But I think we've got to be, and we're reducing fertiliser usage, and we'll put lime on where it's needed, but we're very much looking at getting. I would hope that in 5 years we don't use any fertiliser at all. And we don't use much now. So it's the soil thing, and that's a really good question, and I've asked it myself actually, and I haven't. We've had soil technicians, soil scientists here, and we haven't really got good answers from.
Because over at Bottom Village, they come and study their pasture and their meadows, and they are farming biodynamically, and I don't think that is per se. It's a very interesting another topic to talk about. And I'm not, but I think that there is fundamentals in parts of that practice.
Oh yes, no.
They have lots of labour. They have available labour, and so they can pull all the weeds and they can, But because of that, they're people come from universities to study their soil.
Yes,
Because I think even the farms around them, it's not that they're in this little area of amazing world. The farms around them have all gone. They've got less diversity. Whereas they've managed by farming like that since '54.
Yes, I think that it's a long-term thing, and I think we've got to take that long-term view. And we're certainly not there. We're at the beginning of a project, really.
Because there's a bit of a, in terms of the farming circles that I've talked to, who are interested in farming sustainably, like yourself, and it's about the best for the land over 100 years, not because otherwise we won't hear. So a lot of them are doing this thing now that they reckon in mob grazing.
Yes, and I appreciate that, and
which is where you graze intensively,
that's right.
And then you move on.
But again, it's something that we need to think about more. But we've only just got going here, and it would mean I would have to. You can't mob graze here, right? The difficulty with mob grazing here is if you have a wet summer, you'll just end up with a field as if you've had a herd of sows in it. It'd be chewed up, and that may have its benefits actually. But again, when you've got heavy rainfall as well, so when you've got bare soil up here, we can't reseed up here traditionally. If we have bare soil, it ends up in Garthwaite Reservoir.
Down the road.
So we can't. We have to be very, that again because of the intensity of the rainfall. That I remember as a child, parents saying, "Oh, we've had an inch of rain today, which is really heavy," and we can have 4 inches of rain here, and that's an enormous. It has an enormous impact.
So if you don't think the hay meadows are making that much difference to the soil, why are you planting hay meadows?
Because in terms, I think because that's what they traditionally were. And tradition is an overused and abused
what's tradition?
It's tradition. What is it? Tradition is fashion that's got stuck or something.
Yeah. Well, tradition is the point where you remember.
But from my point of view, I think that we've lost 97% of them.
So what is a traditional hay meadow to the Yorkshire Dales?
So a traditional hay meadow in the Yorkshire Dales. So if you come to the Yorkshire Dales, you'll see, especially Swaledale, you'll see a lot of barns in fields. That barn means that field was a hay meadow. And the system was that the field in which the barn is situated was. It was almost like a self-sustaining system. So hay was made in that field. It was cut sometime between the end of June and the end of September, and stored in that stone barn, and obviously it was because there was horsepower. Then it was easy. There was loose hay, and it was forked manually into that barn and stored there until probably November, when cows were brought in to be tied in tie stalls. And then what would happen is that they would be kept in there until probably the middle of May. The muck would be stored in a midden next to the barn. They'd be mucked out every day, mucked by hand with a shovel. And then at some time after Christmas, I would imagine, on a hard frosty day, that muck would have been taken out in heaps, in little, put in little heaps in the field at intervals, and then later, and would have been left to decompose for a while, and then you'd have gone around and scaled it out with and thrown it out with gripe, muck for, and that would have been the system. So it was self-contained, and those nutrients were recycled, and not only the nutrients were recycled, but the seeds as well from the hay. So the annuals, so a hay meadow is a mixture of annuals, biennials and perennials.
So for those who, because like the hay meadow in the Yorkshire Dales is vastly different to people making hay, because people.
So again, on a farm, so you've got that self-contained system, but not every hay meadow is. So traditionally in the spring, early spring, before the cows were turned out, the cows would have been turned out onto higher pastures, not in the hay meadow, but in the early part of the spring they'd have been grazed by sheep at lambing time, and then at the end of lambing, sort of at the end of, I don't know, usually about 10th of May, those sheep would have been moved elsewhere, and so that meadow would have been shut up from, livestock would have been kept out, and it would have been left for 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 weeks to make hay. And so over the period of time, over the summer, you'd have a cascade of meadows, and traditionally you'd probably have one meadow that was mown first, and that undoubtedly would have a different flora, not completely different, but there would be different emphasis in that flora to the one that was mown on the 29th of August.
Because the way that I understand it is that it's these type of marginal farms, you get more diverse in that. Because they struggle, because grass can dominate and
so there's lots of reasons for it. So there's something called the Allenberg Fertility Index, which is about, and a lot of the species that are specific to Yorkshire Dales hay meadows grow, and when that index is high, and that index is high when nutrients are low. So really there was not a lot of nutrient going back on these. We didn't use inorganic nitrogen, phosphate or potash. It was just the muck that was produced from the cows in the barn. And
do you have to do that as part of your hay meadows?
We put muck on once a year.
You're not allowed to put anything.
We're not allowed to put anything else on.
No.
So muck and lime. And so we've got to try and maintain a reasonable pH. And so you get, whereas you'll get wood cranesbill that flowers early on, maybe in June, and will survive. That's a perennial, and it will survive earlier cutting. It won't necessarily survive competitive growth from new ryegrass species, which will outgrow it and shade it out and compete with it for nutrients. Equally, if you cut early, things like devil's bit scabious, which are very late flowering, will be cut out of the system and will never get a chance to.
So what are you looking for in terms of how many different species are you looking for?
I think the papers suggest that the science suggests that we're looking for something like, the target is something like 25 different species of grass and flowers and herbs within a 4 metre quadrat.
And how would that compare to a conventional farm? So they're just farming normal hay on a conventional farm in Lowlands. How many species are they looking for?
Well, you'd have clover, you'd have ryegrass and timothy. You might have diploid ryegrass. 3 or 4, yeah.
So what practical difference does that make?
That means I can't use.
In terms of why would you want this diversity of species?
Well, it means it's because they're rare.
Yeah, you know,
and it makes
it's beautiful. Don't get me wrong,
because they're rare, and it means that we have something to tell.
Yeah.
And they're worth preserving. B, and equally importantly, they provide habitat, a wildlife habitat that is on the verge of extinction.
Yeah.
And that's essential in terms of insect life.
Yeah.
Certain bumblebees, certain types of butterfly, and then they form part of a food chain.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get bird life, and we've lost. We just earlier saw a grey wagtail on the front. What's missing from here are the yellow wagtails. Yellow wagtails nested almost exclusively in traditional hay meadows.
Yeah.
And that may well be the fact that they were have been mown in April or May or June, and not in September, has a dramatic impact on their survivability. The other one is curlews, and if you go, curlews will valiantly try and nest in the set where they were born, where they hatched.
Yeah.
But if that's a silage field that, like last year, was mown on the 30th of April, just on the way to Jervo, there was somebody on an intensive dairy farm there. You stand no chance, absolutely no chance. So we, and it stipulates for us that we, in our agreement, that we don't mow before the 1st of. I think it's the end of July.
Because you're part of an agreement.
Yeah, a high-level environmental stewardship agreement.
I mean, because the interesting thing about the Yorkshire hay meadows is they are these species, and this makeup is unique to this area of the world and Westmoreland, really. Yes. Kirby Stephen area.
And so it's.
But then you said that you saw echoes of almost the exact same hay meadows in high or mountain pasture.
Oh yeah, so last year we went to the Auvergne, and what's interesting is that they are milking dairy cows at 4,000 feet above sea level.
What height are you here?
We're going from about 700 to 1,400 feet.
But the average.
Well, our house here is about 890 feet.
And most farms will be lower than.
Most farms are about 600 to 700 feet, if and so what was interesting was that we went there at the end of May, early June, and they were grazing these cows at that height of. So they'd just done transhumance and taken their cows from their farms, which were probably at 1,000 metres above sea level,
but they're
drier and warmer. And their cows will have been turned out, I would think, in March or April. But interestingly, come the 15th of May, they take their cows up to the higher pastures and keep them there until the end of September. That's mirrored here in our traditional turnout date here, when our cows will be released from their tie stalls in the past, would have been 15th of May.
Yeah.
And that's a combination of A, growth rate and forage available to eat, and B, the ground's dry enough to take the cattle's hooves. And what we saw in the Auvergne, where there's much more, very, very few sheep and a lot more cattle, was that a lot of the flora in their meadows was comparable to what we had here. So
do you think, I used to work with a Swiss cheesemaker, and he used to say, if you want to make the best cheese, you have to have more than 11 types of grass within your pasture where the animals are being fed on.
Yeah.
Because they were firm believers that at the end of the day, the quality of your milk comes through in the final cheese. And we've seen that in Stitchton when they changed their feed.
Yes.
They had massive problems.
Yes.
And then they changed it back, and the problems were solved overnight. They tried everything with the cheese mate. They thought it was a cheese mate, but in the end of the day, it was just one supplement.
It's an insight.
And it was just like it was incredible the difference that it can make to a traditional cheese.
It was added fat, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was added fat. But then you think, if that's making that much of a difference, then when you buy a pasteurised, standardised cheese, which is they whip everything out and then add the flavour back in by enzymes and things like that. When your cheese in Stitchton's are a real expression of this little little area, then then what your cows are being fed on makes more important.
Well, I think so. So you know, the thing about our northern dairies is they're not outstanding milk producers. They are dual-purpose cattle, but they aren't Holsteins. But Holsteins will have the metabolic drive, the hormonal drive to produce large quantities of milk. The axis of hormonal control has been shifted quite significantly one way, so that a Holstein has a drive to produce milk, and even under unfavourable circumstances, a Holstein will produce milk to its own detriment.
Yeah, so it's Whereas, itself to produce milk.
Yeah, so a northern dairy hasn't had that level of quantitative genetic theory applied to its breeding, and they are much more likely to, when the going gets tough, they switch off and look after themselves. So I'm anticipating if we can get 2 gallons a day from our cows, 10 litres as a peak yield, then I think that's not so bad.
And that ties into...
And it also ties into the fact that they didn't make cheese before they turned the cows out, because because the hay was probably of debatable quality, and then come the end of October, November, these cows were nearly dry anyway, probably, and so they didn't really push that lactation any further on. Again, so you're working within your means, really, and so if we were to bring vast quantities of bought-in feed to feed these northern dairies, well, there are 2 things would happen. One, the cows would get very fat, and 2, you would be diluting your provenance and your terroir, because these cows are
traditional breed of cow fed on traditional hay meadows. It's terroir, really. So
terroir. So and yes, you know, as somebody coming from a private high, selling cheap background, I scoffed at that. And then you go. So we were very fortunate to go to the Science of Artisan Cheese conference in 2016, where we presented our ideas, and one of the and we took some cheese with us, and several things happened as a result of that. One was that we took this cheese for somebody to test, and it was really warm, and we had nowhere to keep this cheese cool enough, and when we got it out of our cool bag, it had deformed, and there was oil coming out, sort of weeping oil out of it, and it wasn't hugely hot. It might have been, I don't know, it might have been 25 or something like that. And you just took note of that. We still had the cheese; it was fine. And we still had, you know. But so then we went to one of the lectures, one of the talks, which was by Bruno Martin from INRA, based at Clermont-Ferrand. He's a scientist there, and he had been looking at the impact of feeding different levels of concentrate on the quality of the cheese produced, and more specifically the ratio of saturated to unsaturated fatty acids in the milk fat.
That's, I think,
and it was a straight line graph, and it was basically the more concentrate you feed, the more starchy based concentrate you feed, the more saturated the milk fat becomes, and therefore the harder the cheese. And so what he was saying to us, and that was amazing for us to go to that, and just so upstairs in our room was this cheese gradually collapsing, and Bruno was down here telling us why it was collapsing. And it was simply that so you've got much more of the favourable omega fatty acids, you've got much more in that milk, you've got much more.
And you think that's down to like the key things of the dairy shorthorns and the pasture?
I think it's the grazing grass, and grazing mainly grass. So our view here is that they will get some concentrate, but it will be the minimum amount to get them to walk into the parlour and stand still to be milked. That's it. No more. And then what we did as a result of that was that we said to Bruno, actually, we'd like to come visit you in the Auvergne. And so what was brilliant about going internet communication, the whole story, is that we went to we visited Bruno at Farm du Bois Jolly, which is Patrick Chassard's farm producing Saint-Nectaire, and he showed us, and he did the whole walk. We did the cows from 4,000 feet above sea level milking. We followed the milk down the valley, saw it being made into Saint-Nectaire, and then he took us into his barn where there's thousands of round bales of hay, and there was hay from 3 different meadows. There was the meadows near the farm, and it smelled beautiful. Very fragrant, lots of different smells in there. Then he took us to one that was probably a slightly higher altitude, and that was less interesting. I mean, it was a nice hay. And then he took us to the stuff that he'd harvested from 4,000 feet above sea level, and it knocked you flat. The amount of volatile oils that came off that were amazing. And what Bruno's done, who's been working with Patrice, is to show that those oils, those terpenes or whatever they are, volatile organic compounds, he has followed those through the cow and into the milk, and many of them are antioxidants, which may well be good for the cow and good and certainly interesting for the cheese, and possibly not bad for human health either. I think that what if we can augment the diversity in our pastures and our meadows, then I think it will mean that we will hopefully in the long run make a more interesting cheese.
I always say that my shop is simple, because I always say that it seems like we're doing something really good when people come visit our shop. But I say it's easy. I just buy cheese from like people who make farm traditionally that taste good, that have got a great story, and they're making on their family. And it's simple. And it sounds like talking to you that it's the same in farming, that it sounds simple. The cows should be out of pasture, should be feeding diverse pasture, should be milked only when they're out of that pasture, and you should make cheese like that. Again, it's simple, but not like nobody does it. Why do you think that, like, even like your next door neighbours, the farms down the road, in fact 95% of farms in the UK just are not going down that route, which sounds like the you know, it kind of most people will sit this, and actually I would guess that the average person in the British public will think the way that you're farming is probably how most people farm. Whereas it's, you know what I mean? Whereas because we're kind of disconnected from farming that much.
I think that, well, I think there are two issues. We can't, we couldn't, in order to make this pay, we will have to sell this cheese at a premium. It wouldn't work to farm. We couldn't farm cows here conventionally and sell and make a conventional farmhouse cheese. When I say we couldn't do a pasteurised cheese and a faster acidification, because we can't charge the premium that we need to charge to make it work. And I think that throughout the rest of I think British agriculture has been driven very much by the pilot high, sell it cheap. I think we've lost the connect with food. We've got other avenues to spend our money on, and I think that I think that we've become more reliant on more. It's been easier to import food. So again,
what effect do you think that has on the kind of ecosystem and animals and farming in terms of the long-term effect?
Well, I think you can. So you can look at it on a global perspective and say that actually, if we're feeding soya to ruminants, then that's destroying rainforests in South America. You can look
at maize, which you can farm industrially.
Well, that's right. Or you can look at it and say, we farm intensive Holsteins, or somebody, the farmers intensive Holsteins in the Vale of York, or in the crop of Bowland or in the Eden Valley, and they'll have a huge tank. This time of year we've not been able to get on the land, it's been so wet, their slough tanks will be full to the brim,
and
they'll go and spreading it, and what happens is that it
leaches.
Well, it runs off. B, with the best one in the world, it will run off. But B, how many times have I heard people say that that they've just spread a load of slurry and all the earthworms will come to the surface, and what's that done for soil structure and soil aeration? That we've just killed the very beings that are trying to help us. And I think we just do things. I can't comment on the economics and the issues that surround feeding a population, and I'm not up to speed enough on the pros and cons of subsidised farming and cheaper food, and what the trade-off is, because there are people who are struggling to feed themselves. Only the other day on the BBC there was a very sobering article which interviewed 3 families in Oldham who were doing their level best under difficult circumstances to try and bring up children, and it was extremely difficult, and an increase in the price of food to them would be fairly catastrophic. I
think we're lucky that we're sitting here in a very privileged position, that we can take these things like farming seriously. But I think it's not
something I have the answer to, and I'm not an economist, but it's a very difficult one, and I can only look at it from the point of view of as a model of survival for me. I can't produce commodities. I can farm wildlife. And hopefully that is a public good, and hopefully going forward we may receive some remuneration for that. I can also use that as a tool to market what we produce. I hope. And I can hope to produce. I can also hope to preserve some cattle genes.
And take them to the Yorkshire Dales. You've got the, as you say, the hay meadows are traditional to Yorkshire Dales. The breed of cow is traditional to this area.
Stone walls, we put up 2 kilometres of stone walls. Gill woodland, we're trying to re-establish some of that as well.
And before you were here, that wasn't really
wasn't on the agenda.
No,
and so if we can help create something here that's that will provide interest, provides us with an income, in the long run, well, not too long run, provides employment, and helps to maintain a rural community and provide tourist opportunities and interesting things for Courtyard Dairy to sell, then that's one part of perhaps an agricultural system in the UK. The feeding the majority of the population, and just how their spend is just divided amongst the various things that that you need in order to live. I don't know, and I think we can't write off the. I think.
Well, I'm all for. I think that. I always when I do a lot of talks on small scale cheese production, I'm not negative. Mass produced cheese is very efficient at what it does, and it's incredibly good at what it does. And when sometimes I go to competitions and I grade cheese, and I remember one year at Highland Show I had to do block industrial cheddar. I'd do about 40 of them, and I went along all 40, and they were just all nice. Because what they are very good at doing is producing a consistent, standardised product. And you know that that type of food has to be produced. And I'm not for that, but that type of food can't be produced in a location like here.
No, it can't.
And
so we've got to make something that's different.
Exactly.
And not only have we got the cows, the hay meadows, the walls, the gill woodland, the stone barns, but we've actually tried to trying to turn the clock back to look at how Wensleydale cheese was produced pre-war, and that is quite a, as you know, it's not straightforward. It's not an easy thing to try and unravel, and there are so few people left alive that remember how it was made, and the cheeses and the milk production methods have changed so considerably that we're now dealing with milk that doesn't necessarily spontaneously ferment.
This is the question we have, this discussion about whether you should even call your cheese Wensleydale, because tradition nowadays people traditionally expect Wensleydale to be crumbly and sharp and acidic and fall apart, whereas that wasn't what it was like. And when we give people cheeses in our shop that challenge their idea of that cheese, it's an interesting thing to talk about, but at the same time they'll go, that's not Wensleydale. Or Graham Kirkham loves it, he's made Lancashire all his life, his mum made Lancashire all her life, her Lancashire made Lancashire all her life. They still go out to farmers markets in Manchester and go, that's not Lancashire, Lancashire doesn't taste like that.
That's right.
I've made it, I've made it
and we can't say we haven't. We've had the conversations with Bronwyn and Francis, and they were calling it something completely different. But it's been finding a name for this cheese has been to call ourselves Stonebeck took us 18 months going around in circles, and eventually, and someone said, well, you might not be here forever. Call it something that you can take with you. Stonebeck is a parish we live in. But also it's a name that would travel throughout the north of England anywhere. It's
plenty of X.
So whilst some people would describe it as being too generic, it's off here. It does have some of that. It helps the provenance. We are in Stonebeck Up parish. And that is Stonebeck, actually. But the Wensleydale bit is interesting. No, we're not. Did we want to call it Nidderdale? Equally, nobody knows what Nidderdale cheese is, so why call it that either? And so and at the end of the day, we are the methods that we've researched, what we've looked at, the people that we've spoke to, have made Wensleydale cheese. So whilst there is an argument to along the lines of you said that it's not white and acidic, it's like Graham Kirkham. It's just exactly the same as Graham Kirkham. Is Graham Kirkham Lancashire cheese? Well, of course it is, but it's different to every other Lancashire cheese that there is.
Exactly.
And so. And that's how it will have been.
But also for you, it's going to be less of an issue because your cheese is not a pre-packed cheese. It's going to sit in the supermarket where people buy a bit of Wensleydale and expect it to be crumbly and sharp. Your cheese is going to be tasted out over a cheese counter, and people are going to go, "Oh, that's not Wensleydale." And then there's going to be, "Well, no, it isn't, but maybe it is." Because. So it is going to be less of an issue in the very nature of how your cheese is going to be sold. It's going to be sold.
It's a talking point and makes it interesting. So let's say it's provocative. I don't care. But if it adds some interest, well then so be it. And there's another thread of story in that direction, and we can talk about Mrs. Archer and Mrs. Peacock.
I think what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll speak to you in a year's time.
Yes.
And we'll see how far you're on that route, and we'll add that on.
All right.
As I think we've talked a lot about farming, which is brilliant. And I think you've given us a great example of how to make traditional cheese. You and both Sally are a credit to your local community as well. I always say that one of the reasons we're doing these films is that I think people are disconnected from farming, but also disconnected from the value that you add to Middlesmore, where your children go to school, a school of about 20, and keep that little school going. You use the local services, they keep the little village shop going, and the whole community relies on people like you. I mean, Johnny Crickmore down in Barrow and Bargo's a classic example. He employs like 12, 13 people. Now, what family farm that's not industrial employs 12, 13 people? There's none. So
we've got, so if we're going to create a viable community here that isn't and subsidy disappears, then we've got to bring that cash in. That added. So we've got to add a value to what we produce here, and that creates employment.
Exactly, and then keeps, as you said, the hay meadows, the traditional breeds of cows, the beautiful cows that are out of pasture where you want to see them, where you want to act naturally. The dry stone walls, the traditional cheese recipes, it kind of keeps that little snapshot of the Yorkshire Dales. Yes, it's not constant because life isn't constant.
No,
How you farm now? You've got a tractor. You know, you're not
yeah.
scything hay. You know, and we shouldn't try and hold on to tradition when it's evolving. But I think that we should try and hold on to things that are good. You know, I think it's
the bits that are the bits that mean sustainability, and sustainability means environment. It means making true profit, and when I mean true profit, that means taking account of environmental impact as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And something to live, and making it meaning that you can exist in your community.
Yeah, exactly, and add value to your community, not just in terms of finance, in terms of actually you are, you know, I think, well, there's also like that little farm up in the Isle of Mull, the Mull family, like they are such a firm part of that community.
Yes,
and you think actually on that rural island, that's a credit as well. You know, it's not just about the cheese and the farm and the sustainability, it's the whole thing. But as I said, we will come back in a year, and when you'll have your first batches of cheese.
Yeah, well, before then, I hope.
Well, we haven't been outside yet. We'll talk more about the cheese recipe, but I think that what you're doing is adding a value to this little upland farm, which otherwise, if you hadn't taken it on, it would.
Well, I think it would have. The difficulty is here that the farm is so way out. It couldn't even. It would have struggled to have been a holiday cottage. And so Stephen Ramsden, our landlord, saw it as a strategic, even though it's small, barely viable or unviable, whatever you wish to call it, farm. Strategically, he didn't want to split it up.
No.
And so we were very fortunate in terms of getting the opportunity.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's remained intact.
And if you hadn't done it, it would have been split up.
Well, it would have been split up, and the house may. Well, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened.
The land might have gone to a bench. Or
it would have gone to next door. And next door said, yes, we'll take the land, but not the farm.
Yeah,
so Stephen said, well, no, I don't want that to happen. So that's how we. And so, you know, if we hadn't have been here, that would have been 2 fewer children at the school.
Yeah.
And you know the rest, and Sally brings an income in to the locality as well. So
and hopefully you others, Thank you very much, Andrew.
No, that's your pleasure. We're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Okay.